Hi, folks. Welcome to this week's episode of Voices of Resilience. My name is Eric Mucky, and I'm the CEO and Executive Director of Lost&Found. Lost&Found is a provider of comprehensive suicide prevention programs and strategies targeting young adults 15 to 34. We're based in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and do some work in South Dakota, Minnesota. And Voices of Resilience is our weekly live cast where we talk about the things and programs and efforts happening in our communities, both here in South Dakota and around the country, that helps each of us find resilience for ourselves, share that resilience with others, and build more resilient communities. Thanks for joining us again this week for this week's episode. I'll introduce our guest for the week, DJ Bookout, here in just a moment. But what I want to start with, as always, is sort of explaining why we're here and what it is that we're trying to get across week to week. And so Voices of Resilience, as I mentioned, is really the place where we're talking about these stories of resilience for ourselves, for others, and community. But this month in particular, we're really focusing on wellness and thinking of wellness a little bit differently than we have in our past lives, or ways in which we might sort of think immediately or react to immediately, and kind of reverse some of those thoughts. So typically what you think of when you think of wellness, you think of just physical wellness, perhaps. And that's one aspect of wellness, and it's an important one at that. But this month, we're really trying to get folks really thinking about what it means to be emotionally, mentally, spiritually well. And so this month, we're really focusing on ways to be well in different ways other than just your physical wellness. And so today, we're excited to bring in DJ Bookout. We'll talk a little bit about the topic of the day, which is becoming mentally honest, and the process and steps it takes to be mentally honest and how that can actually impact our wellness. Before we get started, as we do every week, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. We have a couple of really powerful organizations here in our region that are doing really great work and have helped us make this live cast possible each week. So first and foremost, the A-Strip Family Foundation, a multi-year supporter of Lost&Found financially, but also in terms of their advice and their support in the Minnesota community, especially in Rochester, Minnesota, where they're based out of. The A-Strip Family Foundation focuses their values on family, healthcare, and faith. And so if you want to learn more about the A-Strip Family Foundation, go to astripfamilyfoundation.org and learn more about their work in Minnesota and around the Midwest. And our other sponsor, not to be outdone, of course, American Bank and Trust, another multi-year supporter of Lost&Found and this live cast and our work. American Bank and Trust, based in Huron, South Dakota, with branches all over the state of South Dakota and around the region. You can learn more about American Bank and Trust by going to abt.bank to learn more. So let's cut to it. So this week, I'm really excited to bring you a guest from Newton, Kansas. He'll share a little bit of his story and sort of his background in terms of where he's been, where he's lived, what he does. But I'm really excited to introduce today our guest, DJ Bookout. DJ is the social studies teacher and head cross-country coach and assistant track coach at Newton High School. DJ is 37 years old and has been married 13 of those years to his wife, Gretchen. DJ has 2 kids, daughter Ireland and son Oliver. DJ has spent most of his life in the state of Kansas, so we can relate as a team. Being in South Dakota, there's a prairie connection here going on. So living all over the state, he lived in a mix of sort of country and small town life throughout his childhood. After graduating from Pretty Prairie High School, DJ decided to go to Bethel College on scholarship for cross country music, graduating from Bethel in 2009. DJ started first teaching in Carbondale, Kansas as a special education teacher and stayed in the profession for about 12 years. And this past March, COVID times, of course, he learned of the opportunity to teach in his hometown of Newton, Kansas, after working at Wichita North High School for 4 years, and decided to move home to teach and take charge of his first cross-country program. So we're really excited to have DJ with us today. He's going to walk us through sort of what it means to be mentally honest. So DJ, welcome to the stream here.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here today. So what we always like to start off with is sort of wearing hats. We wear many hats in our lives. What are some of the hats that you wear?
So like you mentioned, being a dad, my dad's still alive, so son. I also have 2 brothers, both grown. And then husband. I'm going to add to that kind of an ongoing mentor with students of mine, and also I don't know what they would call me. So there's been times, it depends on the student, but I've been called their dad. It's usually a slip, but it's always a weird reaction I get when it happens, but it's a sign of a good connection. So, and then anything else that I need to be at that point in time. So,
filling many hats for sure, not just in your own life, but also in the lives of other people. And I'm thinking of those hats. So there's a common thread here, and we'll dive into some of the experiences you've had. I do want to start off and ask you. So you talk about sort of living in many places, and you shared that with me when we first were getting started and preparing for today. Tell me about sort of what this experience has been like for you, sort of living throughout the state of Kansas and now sort of coming to a place you now call home.
Okay. Yeah. My parents split when I was 6. And so shortly after that, like I was born in Hutchinson, but parents had split custody. And so I learned early on that home was usually wherever my parents were. So mom and dad had a, a tough upbringing themselves. And like with many adults, that affected them later on when they had kids. And of course, when you have a split household, the psyche involved there is so complicated. It takes forever to unpack that, and that's something that age has shown me. But I've also learned to be a little bit more fluid with my definition of home. There's a place I live, and then whether or not that's home or not, and those two different things have quite the dichotomy. And divorced kids usually know what I'm talking about because they have no idea what home is. Sometimes parents rent, and there's never a stable home. And for me, that just became a big desire, as with many other divorced kids. So, fortunately, my life pattern is different than my parents. And so I learned that I needed to create that home. And so that took a while too. So I've my home is currently Newton, Kansas, but even though I've lived here for a number of years, not all of those years has it felt like home. It's only recently. So
And tell me a little bit more about that. So when it comes to sort of finding home, what makes home for you? What does that look like?
yeah. 37-year-old self answer to that is home is a place where you can go to and you're not worried you're going to have to leave. And so for me, growing up, moving multiple times, I always knew that we were going to leave because at some for miss the rent long enough, get kicked out. There was a time where we were living inside of my mom's car because she was couch surfing with her friends when we were early on. Fairly, let's see, that was fairly soon after my parents divorced, and so home back then was wherever parents were. And so one of the things that eventually happens is time runs out, and so there for a long time I felt homeless. But we were never truly homeless in a way. We always had family to go to, but that depended a lot upon my parents' relationship with their family. So,
and it sounds like tell me this, DJ. So You've been through a lot, by the sounds of it, to say the least. I'm curious, and the common thread it seems like in your life story is that running seemed to be a home, and I'd love to learn more. Sort of going to Bethel on scholarship for cross country music. You're leading a cross country program. What has running meant to you, and sort of what has that done to sort of help shape your life?
Early on, it was an outlet, and it still is. I've never been one that likes to sit down much for very long, unless I'm hooked to a book or a video game or a show or something like that. But running, the way I'm going to articulate it is a little bit different than what I thought it was, but like it was always something that never let me down. And so I knew that if I put time and energy into it, that I would see something for my time and energy. And most of the time, that just meant that I could sleep at night because I was worn out from running. But definitely early on, it was an escape. And it was also something that helped me boost my ego. The benefits of running in a small town is that the conception of success is usually in terms of who can run the farthest. And I remember the longest I ever heard anyone running in Pretty Prairie was 6 miles. So I knew that if I beat 6 miles, that I would be a success. And so when ego crumbs look pretty good, you'll take whatever you can get. And so that was enough for me. And fortunately, I was able to connect with people at Bethel later on, and it kind of was a natural place to go for me.
Well, and one, I have to say the articulation you're sharing there, when it comes to sort of finding not just an outlet, but sort of a place to sort of rest, it seems like a really, just from experience, sort of running maybe alongside you here, can really wear you out. And I'm curious. So you came to Bethel sort of in this dual purpose, or you're sort of looking at scholarships, not just for cross country, but also for music. So quite the pairing, I have to say. Tell me a little bit about sort of what that experience was like for you, sort of how you balanced out those two worlds, sort of making this transition into Bethel.
Yeah. Back in 5th grade, we were first introduced to music instruments. We could pick from a range of instruments, and so going to college was just a kind of a domino effect, really. I had learned to practice a lot more if I wanted to move up in chairs when I was in band. And the recognition I earned from that was fulfilling. I was terrible. I was just really terrible, and I think that's where my love of teaching came from, is because I would spend time with Mrs. Moore, my band teacher, after school, and we'd spend at least a half hour every day, and I was just committed to being the best trumpet player there. And so I clung to the idea that if I practice at something, I would get better at it. And this is something that I know a lot of students face later, usually in high school, depending on the size of the program, but later on in college, they're not the best instrumentalists there. And so I learned all that when I was at Bethel. It was not something that I was aware of before going. I was just happy to get recognized for really anything. But Newton's known for their talented musicians here in this area, and so I got to experience what some really good young musicians were, and lived under their shadow for as many years as I could take at Bethel before I decided, okay, clearly not the best here. but I learned a lot, and I formed good connections with them, and those good players are now professional musicians. So not a bad edge to sharpen off of. So, and I still play it in order to entertain my kids every once in a while. So still getting some use, but
Well, from one trumpet player to another, I think you're getting a little bit more mileage out of it than I am right now. I have to ask,
yeah.
what do you like to play? What's your go-to when you're playing your trumpet?
I love jazz. I was a softie for I they call it urban jazz or the pop jazz. I think Rick Braun was my favorite trumpet player growing up, and so he's a very talented, and I just latch on to melodies. If there's a catchy melody, and I'm picky about that. I'll try to play it by ear if I can, and I usually fail, which is fine. I remember spending a number of hours in high school trying to transpose what I heard on the CD to to actuality, and I had no idea how to do any of that. I was just playing by ear, and I knew how to read music, but back then we didn't have the internet, so I couldn't just pull up the sheet music and play it.
Yeah, there's a pretty unlimited amount of sheet music available to you now. You can
That's
actually go
crazy.
figure it
That's
out.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been a lot easier at that point in time.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this and kind of putting it into context. I know it's good to get some background and kind of give folks a chance to sort of understand sort of this is where you come from, this is what you did, this is sort of the worlds that you kind of have lived in. And I'm curious, thinking about today's topic, being mentally honest, that duality and sort of the back and forth you've lived in for a lot of your life. I'd love to hear more sort of what you really mean when you say being mentally honest. I know it's something I've been looking forward to hearing from today, and I know folks listening would love to hear that too.
Sure. I think it is somewhat of an extension to the chaos I experienced early on. There's a real need for stability, and I thought growing up that was probably just a natural side effect to not to having a split family. And I know that's still a very current theme. But then later on, I started learning that chaos lives internally and manifests itself. Like if I'm experiencing anxiousness or nerves or something, at some level, there's something fundamental that's bothering me that I haven't really admitted to myself, and sure as heck haven't admitted to anyone else. Insecurity goes deep, and so I think the fulcrum for any progress is how honest I was with myself. Like it took years to develop that, and it depended on the topic too. I've journaled for I could say most of my life. I carry these little journals with me every now and then to have a place for my brain to go to when I'm tired of cycling through the same thoughts. And what I've noticed over the years is not much changes as far as what I write. It's just kind of a reminder of the need for being honest with myself. I remember at some point feeling like I was never listened to, and then I would project that onto other people, building a wall between them and myself because I never felt listened to. And so I needed somewhere to go with that. I chose not to go to drink or substance abuse and have in my entire life where a lot of people go. And so I needed to be honest at some level with myself. And so that was kind of a fulcrum. And another thing that connects to that is when you grow up in chaos, you look for stability wherever it is. And sometime, I think probably 3 or 4 years ago, I stumbled upon this waitbutwhy.com website, and on there's a life calendar. And I ordered it and I printed it off, and it's actually sitting in my classroom now. And for me, that created a constant. There's a set number of years that I had, and so anything I married myself to time-wise needed to be respective of my time on Earth, because one of the things you learn when you lose your parents young is that time matters. And I conceived that when I was younger. I wasn't that immature, but I really learned that I needed something constant, and so time is hard to argue with, and it's one of the things that I continue to check myself on almost regularly, which pushes me to do the things I need to do for myself. All of that would not happen if I wasn't mentally honest with myself, admitting my faults and weaknesses, and when I can bear to, turning my eyes to them and seeing what happens.
How in this process, and I really appreciate you walking that through for us, just so we can understand sort of what this concept really means. I'm curious in practice, what I guess sort of started that for you, sort of got you thinking like, hey, I should really be mentally honest.
A good indicator for me is, what am I not willing to talk about? And I've used that before. It's definitely not my idea. It's like the things that, like, for instance, if Gretchen and I have a disagreement and it's over something that I don't know that I want to talk about, chances are I'm not going to change, or anything's going to change until I talk about it. And so chasing the gaps for me on those areas, and it's not something that I learned to do on my own. There's a resource that I use through this psychologist. I'm sure some of your people know who I'm talking about, Jordan Peterson, and he has a self-authoring .com website, and I've done 90% of that program, the whole thing. And one of those things is, it has you list out all the things that all the personality traits that you have and the virtues and so on. And so it's a painful process, very painful process, because you have to, assuming I was willing, you have to go into the darkness. And so I did that a few years ago. And those things that I didn't want to happen, I had to think that out and picture the hell, and which was easy for me because I thought that I had lived through hell growing up, and I did at some level. But later on, I realized how much worse it could be, and that's a good way to chase the light, for lack of a better way to say it.
Know how far to go before it really gets to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. It's an interesting, I really appreciate that perspective, just being able to understand sort of how do you foot the bottom of a pit and really understand where to go forward from there. I'm curious, in your life, can you share examples of sort of where you found mental honesty really show up the most?
Yeah. The latest example is, why in the heck would I move during COVID to a different job?
I can get that.
Like, because I was very comfortable. I enjoyed teaching at North High. I should say I enjoyed teaching. I didn't enjoy all the time being a special ed teacher, because I felt like, this is just my opinion, but there's special education in each of us. And I learned that it wouldn't hurt for everyone to have an individualized education plan. An IEP, in other words, is the bulwark of what a special ed teacher does. And so, and one of the things that I experience as a teacher is there's never enough time. And so to upset that balance, during COVID, because I had strong connections with students. I've been through loss with losing my own students that I spent hours and hours upon with. It it's it, it's a home for teachers who stay in the in the profession. I'd say nearly all of them have created a home. And so for me, that was definitely something that happened. I just wanted to be somewhere long enough to, obviously for careers, you can't pay the bills with constant chaos, and which is always something that's on my mind when I was growing up, because we were living paycheck to paycheck. And so before I made that decision, though, I had to make a pro con list to the decision, talk to my coworkers through that process, because I had definite hands and in a lot of things, being involved as a coach. And I really had to compare the time that I spent traveling to Wichita to the time that I gained back from being closer to home, because my kids are young, 5 and 8, and I remember seeing my dad go off to work every day when I was younger, and not seeing him for a long time. And so that I've always wanted to know what it was like to be a part of that, to just be as stable as possible. And so I couldn't get there, though, if I was letting myself work there, solely for the money, because it was a pay cut when I moved. In a way, there's other ways of being paid, and so I'm definitely glad I invested in that choice. But I'll still miss the family I had at North, just because they were family. So the process of being mentally honest with myself was the thread between that. It helped me talk to my students who shared their hearts with me, and I with them, my coworkers, and so on. They're still best friends to me, and that is something that I decided to invest my energy in my hometown, because I did work for Newton a while back before I was at North High, and that was a bad time in my life, and I wasn't the best teacher then, but it was also in charge of a very hard program, and so I had to come to grips with my weaknesses when I came back as well. And it's been a nice year to do that, because teaching during coronavirus isn't easy.
It's not easy as it is, let alone during coronavirus.
There's a lot more to say on that, but
yeah, I can imagine. I know I can appreciate your perspective, not just on things like IEPs and making sure that folks are really getting this care and support they need, but also sort of your concept of being mentally honest with the community you came from, and also the one you're coming to, and knowing what community means to you. And I have to say, one of the things that we were most impressed with and really kind of blown away by was your decision to run in honor of your senior athletes at Wichita North. And I'd love if you'd be willing to share a little bit more about what that was like.
Sure. So as with, I think, athletes nationwide, their track season was cut short, and many of my students were seniors at North High. We I mentioned this earlier when you and I were visiting, but a coach's job usually is year round, depending on the amount of time you can invest in your athletes as well as your family. It's a delicate balance. But with my North High kids, they had committed to track practice and cross country practice during 2019-2020 year, and they ran year round. I had athletes running with me year round, which is an impressive time commitment for young people to do, and I didn't take it lightly. I would spend time with them during lunch, which is usually duty free for teachers, because I loved them. For me, teaching has been kind of a way of cheating time because my kids are going to get older. I'd like to know how to be a dad to them when they're older. And one of the best ways I've learned to do that is, and then you have to be careful with this, but is to treat my students as if their life mattered to me. And so I would spend time with them, and they still communicate with me. Um, so when the track season got cut short, I needed something to do. We were in remote. I needed some way to channel all that energy, and I can say compassion. That word's been a little bit abused, but for me, it was definitely there. And I needed a way to channel that. And so, since I couldn't practice with them on a daily basis, I couldn't even see them. Um, I decided, along with my best friend, she's still the head cross country coach at North High, Tracy Miggs. She's a special ed social worker, actually school social worker too, for North High. Um, and so she had known that I was planning on doing this as an idea anyways, just running from Newton to Wichita, and just, well, sanity is not that important to me. So she'd known I wanted to do this, and when our seasons got cut off, she coached soccer, women's soccer, and I track. Um, we we needed some way to channel that, so we used that run. She ran the first part of it with me to from Newton to Wichita, and really, like it is anytime we talk, it was a time for us to to share our misery, but also share our love to our students. And so we documented the whole run by checking in on Facebook Live, and and just really just a strong commitment to the students. Didn't know really what to say, just communicated to them that we cared, and I knew they knew that. Um, it was just something that, when everything's bad news in the news, you try to bring your own good news, and that's something I and she felt responsible to do. So,
Well, I can say in terms of running that distance, you're running almost 55 miles. I mean, that's I think that speaks volumes, EJ, about the care and concern for your students. So I know how much we appreciate it. And for folks listening, we shared the story there in the comments for you to check out. Hope you'll read a little bit more about what DJ and or
Tracy.
Tracy,
Yeah.
sorry, Tracy
Okay.
did together to honor their student athletes. Before I transition into I got a couple other questions and a couple rapid fire to throw your way. How does mental honesty translate into the work that you do with your students and with your athletes? How do you teach that?
Yeah. I think you have to personally model it. And so, like, I was running to North on that run, but I ran back to my Newton program, and how honored am I that because some of my students and athletes came to meet me when I ran back to the high school on the way back, and I'm like, how dare I mess with that? Like, trade that trust, because these young people saw me, this person they didn't even know, suddenly show up, in the news, and like that happened later on. And a good number of the students didn't even know about it, which is fine with me. That's not the point. I'd rather not have the attention. Um, but there's very few things that I'm not going to say young people only. There's very few things that people trust. And so that genuine honesty, like, I had to start with a solid foundation, because I have big, like, I know that students have way more potential than they're being asked to share, no matter what year it is, no matter what crises they go through. It's something that I've learned and take very seriously. I also know that they won't trust just anyone. And so and words really matter. And so the things that I do on a daily basis, I feel personally responsible to model those to my students at the level I can, especially the weaknesses, because the imperfections are, for me, more important than the perfections. The perfection or the success is just a side effect of the process. And so, like right now, I'm dealing with a foot injury. I don't run as much as I used to, which is great because now I can articulate the process of not just being 100% every day. It's like, how do I negotiate what's going on in my body with my expectations? And the better I do at communicating that, the more trust they have with me. And so my outreach is only limited to my ability to share it. And just so happens I teach, so I get access to it. 90 plus students a day, who are excellent feedback sources. If you want to know how you're doing as a teacher, ask your students and listen for their response, because they'll tell you. They want to tell you. And when they're silent, they're speaking even louder. It's hard to interpret that. So I don't know if that helps or makes sense. It's just kind of a delicate process.
Makes sense to me. And I can say with certainty, probably in those situations, asking your students, you're probably getting more than just mental honesty in this case sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, Snapchat still terrifies me. So,
well, we'll avoid the Snapchat conversations
yeah,
in this
Snapchat.
case. But I do have to ask, because I'm curious too. So got a few rapid fire questions for you to kind of lighten before we move into the finish. So you're a runner, you've been running for a long time. Who is your favorite runner of all time?
David Goggins. He documents his process in his book Can't Hurt Me. A fascinating person, and he's one of the biggest resources I've used for a long time. He does such a beautiful job of showing what raw honesty is, and he's not perfect. I look to him for certain things, mostly running wise, but for parenting advice, don't go there. He's on a different plane. But I think you can funnel that honesty into being a really good parent. You just have to be careful. So yeah, that's definitely an easy question to answer.
Tell me a little bit too. So the scholarships went for cross country and music. What was your favorite subject in school growing up?
Oh man, that was a hard one. I actually enjoyed independent study, which allowed me to navigate multiple subjects. That was my first answer to that question, and it's only an option. Most students aren't aware that they can use that time that intentionally. So that, like, when I had freed up my time credit wise to do that, I just took off. I'd go into the school library, and we didn't have computers back then that were as easy to find stuff. God knows what I would have done if I had that. But I spent time on, at least I thought, studying what I wanted to do professional wise. And history, I teach history. I loved history, but I still have a hard time remembering dates and times and stuff. That's not the history that matters to me anyways. It's the person behind the history and the people behind the history. And it's so fun to find ways of teaching that. So, but I hooked onto that. It also happened to be a class I did somewhat well in. I was, given my upbringing, I never had straight A's. I was on the National Honor Society, but it was a surprise every time.
Well,
and it wasn't every year either. So,
well, I have to say I'm now a little bit jealous. I have to say the interdisciplinary nature of what you're trying to do. I love that. It's interesting. We had our guest last week, Dr. Stephen Jackson, is a history professor. It's interesting. You both have kind of summarized sort of this idea of maybe not about the dates or the times, really about sort of the people and the stories and the communities. So I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
What's your hidden talent beyond being able to play a trumpet for your kids and run crazy long distances?
I had to ask my wife that question. The first thing she said, and I'll just share, is writing. Like it helps me communicate, and I write not every day, but it's definitely an underplayed. I would call it a talent, because if you can, if you know what you're thinking on something, you're already leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of people around you. I know what I disagree with most of the time, and I disagree with a lot of the things that I write, because they show me that I'm not 100% with myself too. So I don't know. That's talent enough for me.
That's all the talent you need, I would say. If you can communicate, you can do a lot else. So I can appreciate that one. The one last, I have two more rapid fire questions for you. The one that I'm interested in, completely out of the element of our conversation, but I couldn't help but thinking of, okay, DJ is running miles and miles and miles, Roadrunner, hopping around the landscape, so to speak. Favorite cartoon? What's your favorite cartoon?
I don't have an answer for that one. I wasn't much of a cartoon kid. I enjoyed the series Avatar, but that my brother would probably kill me if I didn't say Avatar, so I'll say Avatar. But
say no more. That's all you need.
I never really paid much attention to him.
Well, last rapid fire question for you. What's one song you think anybody should listen to today?
I put a lot of thought into this one. It's weird that I'm going to even say this, but Most Girls by Haley Steinfeld. I I probably wouldn't have done this if I wasn't a dad. Maybe I would have. I don't know. I like a catchy melody, but the one of the things that I teach sociology, and one of the things that sociology allows you to do is get the proper perspective on things, or at least try to get the proper perspective. And one of the most useful tools for me is trying to understand people I don't understand. And so there's a lot of empowerment music out there, but that one's got some replays from me, because I have a daughter, I have a wife, I have female students, I'm a guy. Like I'd like to be able to understand at some level what it is they go through. And so just so happened that that's on my playlist. Is I I don't know what it says for women, but that's the last song that I listened to that got replays for me. I listened to a whole bunch of stuff, and usually stray away from what my students suggest, because I'm not sure I can handle it. But
I mean, it's a fun game, right? You walk into the classroom and tell them what your favorite song is, and their reactions, I'm sure, just no. Yeah. We're adding that one. We've got a playlist for building 2021 of every song from our guests, and so adding Most Girls to the playlist. So it's a good addition.
I wasn't even 50% confident when I was going to share that, but I knew it would be the truth. Like, okay, the last song I listened to.
Mental honesty, DJ. This is what we're here for. So, well, knowing our time here, why don't we close out with one last question for you for the day? So, thinking of your life, thinking of all the experiences you've been through and continue to share with your family, with your students, what's one thing you've learned in your life that you wish everybody else understood?
Listening. Like it's a word that a lot of people use, but I can't say it enough. Like if you can really listen, there's active listening. Look up Carl Rogers. He models listening really well. And there's other people. There's plenty of books on it. But if you can really listen, you can escape your head long enough to see you. And it, oh man, it's said almost all the time whenever I've seen problems, or if I don't really have behavior management issues because I've learned to pay attention the hard way. But listening is so important, and how to listen, like the best definition so far that I've found is if you can repeat back what the person says to you and they're satisfied with your understanding, then you've listened. And I love that. It's a tool that has helped me become a better parent, better everything. And it takes constant reinforcement, and so it's a very present process. And I just want to encourage those of you who are listening to keep it up, because there's a lot going on in our world. So I just want to encourage those who are doing it to keep doing it.
Well, I know we've appreciated being able to listen to you today, DJ, and be able to hear your story and your perspective. I want to say thanks on behalf of our team to you. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to our listeners for taking the time to listen to you and to listen to your perspective, DJ. So thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for your organization and what you guys do. I think it's important.
Thank you, DJ. I'll close out here today, folks, with a couple of things per usual. So what's sort of going on with Lost and Found this week? Well, this week we've had the privilege to support our partners at South Dakota State University. They're officially launching a pilot program that will bring peer mentorship services, one-on-one peer mentorship services to students. We'll be able to share more information as that comes out from the SCSU Lost and Found chapter. I want to share that piece of news today. And for those of you listening, want to learn more about sort of the concepts we're bringing out here today and the concept of resilience on its own, please check out the definition of resilience and the resources available from the American Psychological Association. You can use this link. We'll share it here in the comments as well. But when you think of resilience and you think of wellness, those things really aren't all that different. And really the idea is you can learn how to be well, you can learn how to be resilient. And those definitions don't just encompass things like your physical wellness. They encompass all sorts of wellness and resilience and things that can help your life and grow in different ways, whether it's being mentally honest or as DJ was sharing at the very end, just simply learning how to actively listen to those in your life and understand you've learned enough to ensure that the other person is satisfied with the understanding that you have of what's going on. So appreciate your time today, folks. And thanks again for joining us for this week's episode of Voices of Resilience. Happy to connect with you here this next week. We have a couple of guests signed on for the next couple of weeks, and we'll join you back here next week. Thanks for watching today, and look forward to having you here with us next week. We are compassionate.
We are inclusive.
We are responsive.
And we are here.